Welcome to СивиЛНeթ. My guest joining me via Skype from Geneva is a regular contributor to our program. He is a historian and journalist, Vicken Cheterian. Vicken, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
And the reason we've asked you to talk to us today is because of a project which I'm sure has taken many years of your life to bring to fruition. It's a new book called Open Wounds, Armenians and Turks, A Century of Genocide. Unfortunately, we don't have the book yet here in Armenia, so I haven't read it. I was reading some of the reviews, which are extraordinary. Jeffrey Robertson said that it is an important book about the distortion of history. And Professor Ronald Sunni said that there's no other text like this. Let's start at the beginning. What motivated you to write this book?
The idea came from 2011. In fact, it was my publisher in London, Michael Dwyer, who suggested that I write a book on the 1915 genocide for the centenary. And I told him that, well, there are a number of very good books that were recently written about the events during the First World War, 1915 to 1923 period. And what was lacking is the consequences of the genocide later, the history of its denial and the impact of the denial of the Armenian genocide on global political culture. So I wanted to investigate the question, what happens when there's a crime committed and the world pretends that it didn't happen? Does it fade away? Does it disappear? Or does it leave traces? So I wanted to research those traces left behind.
And you looked at both the Armenian experience and the Turkish experience, I presume.
I didn't distinguish between Armenian and Turkish experience. I wanted to see what such a crime does to humanity in general. Both victims, perpetrators, bystanders. Does it have any impact? And of course, we know that for the survivors of the genocide and their descendants, it has a huge psychological impact. What I was missing at the time was the impact it left behind for the survivors of the genocide in Turkey itself, but also for the perpetrators, the impact of the genocide, the way it shaped the political culture in Turkey. It's incredible, and that was kind of the big surprise of this research.
Yeah, in the book you say that Turkey cannot move forward. Obviously, I'm reading from reviews, that it cannot establish justice and democracy as long as it does not confront the sins of the past, and that the modern Turkish Republic really has been formed because of the Armenian genocide, or on the ruins of the Armenian nation in the Ottoman Empire. Is that what you found in your study, in your examination of this?
Yes, absolutely. There's such a strong continuity between this huge crime committed back in the First World War and the political culture established later on. Because when we pretend that the crime is not a crime, it's a heroic act. It was, an incredible kind of heroic act. That's the qualification given to the criminals in Turkey. So what happens later is that the crime itself becomes legitimate, and the political institution, the Turkish state in this case, which is behind this crime, does not shed away the instruments of the crime. The mechanism of the crime becomes legitimate and goes on functioning. And when we look at the Turkish history, once the Armenians were eliminated, those who are left on the same land, namely the Kurds, become the new minority and become the new victim of state policies. So one of the major legacies of the Armenian genocide is that when we do not identify a crime as such, then crime becomes both legitimate and an efficient instrument of conflict resolution. So we put aside other instruments, diplomacy, policy, various other instruments of conflict resolution, and we apply the instruments used during the genocide. Deportations, massacres, repression, denial of the identity of the other, all those policies continued for decades in Turkey.
Oh, yeah, it's an incredible narrative, isn't it? The continuation of that. Talk to me, if you will, what Hrant Dink, his life and his death, what did it mean for consciousness in Turkey about confronting history?
I start the book with the assassination of Hrant Dink, and I have a whole chapter. The first chapter is about Hrant and what he did. And for me, the turning point is not the assassination itself. In Turkey, there are a large number of assassination of politicians, opposition figures, intellectuals, journalists. But what marks Hrant Dink's assassination is the funeral and 100,000 people walking and saying, we are all Hrant Dink, we are all Armenian. And this was a revolution in the Turkish public opinion, in its consciousness. And Hrant was the first Armenian who claimed public space in Turkey, since 1915, in fact. And he was assassinated for that. He was assassinated because he dared to talk. And what Hrant was trying to do was to create a dialogue with the average Turk, with the Turkish public opinion, talking to his consciousness and saying, listen, brother, in your village, in your neighborhood, 100 years ago, 90 years ago, there were Armenians, there were churches, there were schools. They are not here now. What happened to them? And I feel that large sectors of Turkish intellectuals feel very responsible, because when Hrant was under threat, they didn't realize that Hrant was different. They thought that this was yet another pressure from the state on pro-reform intellectuals. But there was one point which distinguished Hrant from the others. It was the fact that he was Armenian.
You know, Vicken, in talking with some of our Turkish colleagues, and when we have traveled to Istanbul, we will hear from Turkish civil society, from Turks, that life for them changed after Hrant's assassination, that there was this fundamental shift. And in your book, I believe, you know, you look at that 100-year period of almost neurotic obsession for the Armenians when it comes to genocide, and then the Turkish state's neurotic obsession with denying it. We are now in the 100th year, the centenary of the Armenian Genocide on April 24. The world, Armenia, will be commemorating it. You know, a variety of events taking place, commemorations. What's going to happen on April 25?
I think first, all of us will feel a huge fatigue, emotionally, physically. I mean, to work on a genocide is very demanding, and it's very tiresome. I mean, it puts us in front of fundamental questions, existential questions. And on April 26th, what we have to do is to go on working on this, because humanity up to now did not make the conclusions necessary from this experience. And our message should be, and we are bearers of this message, should be that all of us, humanity in general, not just Armenians, have paid a huge price for ignoring the first Holocaust of the 20th century, the Holocaust that took place during the First World War. And for this ignorance, for closing our eyes, humanity has degraded its political culture and accepted levels of violence unseen in past centuries. And we have to correct this. And we as Armenians have this responsibility to go on reminding the world of its responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect message, especially this year, about the responsibility as human beings, as citizens of the world, and not only for the Armenian nation itself. Just as a final question, Vicken, what did it mean for you to write this book? How important was it for you to say what you needed to say with this work?
To be honest, I'm not someone who has worked a lot on the Armenian genocide in the past. Simply thinking about the subject or simply reading books was so painful that I tried to avoid it. But in 2011, I started working on this because I was encouraged by the fact that a number of Turkish intellectuals were already working on it. So it stopped being the pain of my people, the Armenians. It became something bigger than that. But the second lesson I learned is that by researching on 1915 and its meaning, I discovered that we had such a huge civilization throughout the Ottoman Empire, which disappeared, which was destroyed. And it's this richness that I discovered by working on 1915. And we have also the responsibility to go beyond 1915, to go beyond the genocide, and to rediscover the incredible civilization our grandfathers, grandmothers were building on various localities in the Ottoman Empire, and to value it again.
Well, I think, again, what wonderful sentiments and beautiful words that should be the banner, I think, for Armenians in the coming century to really appreciate the civilization that existed and to rebuild once again past the 100th anniversary. So Vicken, thank you so much. Thank you for the book. Thank you for being our guest. And we hope to see you in Yerevan for a book signing very time soon.
Thank you, Marianne. Thanks, ＳիվիլՆեթ.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was historian and journalist based in Geneva, Vicken Cheterian, who has just recently published a book about the Armenian Genocide called Open Wounds. Stay with ＳիվիլՆեթ.